All right, let's dive straight into this explainer, because I really want you to put yourself in this passenger seat. Imagine you're on a brand new Boeing 735. You're descending toward New Orleans, just waiting for that routine touchdown. Outside your window, it's a beautiful sunny day, until suddenly, it's not. The sky turns absolutely pitch black. You hit what feels like a solid brick wall of air. The cabin is tumbling violently. The noise is absolutely deafening as massive hail just hammers the outside of the plane. And then, in a split second, everything goes totally dark. The alarms in the cockpit are screaming, but the engines, they're completely dead. Passenger Lee Burmeister was actually sitting in that cabin, and her description of this moment is chilling. You go from this roaring, violent thunderstorm to just nothing. This abrupt, eerie silence. She said it felt exactly like sitting in a dark room when the power goes out at your house. The air conditioning stops, that constant comforting hum of the jet engines just vanishes, and then this terrifying realization washes over the entire cabin. You're trapped inside a completely dead machine, miles above the ground. And the sheer speed of this disaster is just staggering. Check out this timeline. At 0 minutes, they fly into a storm so intense, investigators later said it had the energy of an atomic bomb. Within 60 seconds, the severe hail and turbulence hit. By minute 2, they suffer a catastrophic dual-engine flameout, both engines gone. And by minute 3, they are in a powerless freefall. Think about that. This wasn't some slow, creeping mechanical failure. In exactly 180 seconds, a state-of-the-art aircraft turned into a silent falling rock.
Which brings us to the next phase of this nightmare, a 43-ton glider falling, defined by that eerie silence. There was no intercom announcement telling people to stay calm because the pilots literally had zero electrical power to even talk to the cabin.
Now, what's really terrifying about this number right here is what it meant for the passengers in the back. They were dropping at 1,500 feet per minute. Without those massive CFM56 engines pushing them forward, gravity was just taking over. Time was completely evaporating, and the dark ground was rushing up to meet them fast. In the cockpit, Captain Carlos Dardano was staring down a dead stick landing. And look, that's not just some dry aviation jargon. It meant he had to force land an airplane with zero propulsive power. It was his literal, grim reality. And to make this even more intense, Captain Dardano only had one eye. He'd lost the other one in a crossfire during a civil war in El Salvador years earlier. So here he is, with limited depth perception, staring down at the Gulf of Mexico, trying to fly a 43-ton dead stick. While he's fighting the controls, the human stakes back in the cabin are just unimaginable. Flight attendants are frantically going through emergency checklists using hand signals. Passengers are taking off their shoes, stowing jewelry, bracing for the end. And poor Lee Burmeister, she had just had surgery for a ruptured appendix in Belize. She had fresh stitches going right up the middle of her stomach. Imagine that visceral, physical dread. She's terrified the plane is going to crash, and equally terrified that just bending into the crash position is going to rip her stomach wide open. So, the plane hits 5,000 feet, and desperation kicks into overdrive. The crew attempts what we're calling the fatal restart. The ground is getting dangerously close, and they absolutely have to get those engines spinning again to survive. Here's the crazy high-pressure sequence they had to nail. Step 1. Fire up the auxiliary power unit, the backup generator. When that finally kicked on, the cabin lights flickered back to life, giving the passengers this tiny, fleeting wave of hope. Step 2. Introduce fuel and air. Step 3. Get that thrust. Amazingly, at 5,000 feet, they actually got them to ignite. They even radioed air traffic control saying, "We got them back." But, well, something was horribly, horribly wrong. It all came down to physics. In a normal engine start, you get a nice balance of fuel and air, which gives you thrust. But Flight 110, they suffered a hot start. See, the engines were totally swamped with rain and hail, so they weren't getting enough air. When they pumped the fuel in, it just ignited uncontrollably. So instead of pushing the plane forward, the temperature gauges in the cockpit went off the charts. The internal turbine blades of these multi-million-dollar engines were literally melting. They were burning themselves alive from the inside out. So now they are bracing for the end with nowhere to land. With the engines literally self-destructing and a massive fire risk on their hands, Captain Dardano had to make the excruciating call to pull the throttles back and permanently kill the engines. At just 3,000 feet, they were completely out of second chances. And this perfectly illustrates the impossible choice he had to make. Air traffic control says, "Hey, try this interstate highway," but Dardano flat out refused. He remembered a Southern Airways crash years prior where landing on a highway killed 9 people in cars, and he wasn't going to risk mass casualties on the ground. So what's left? A swamp or a canal? Ditching in the water carried a massive risk of the plane instantly breaking apart or just sinking to the bottom, but it was literally the only option he could live with.
Meanwhile, the vibe in the cabin was just suffocating. Lee called it a doomsday kind of feeling. She, like everyone else, was just bracing for the plane to blow into pieces. She sat there in the dim light and mentally said goodbye to her family. The flight attendants didn't even have to say a word. Their faces said it all. They were maybe 60 seconds from hitting the water.
We get to the impossible levee landing. They are lined up for the water, ready for impact, when an absolute miracle peeks through the storm clouds. First Officer Lopez looks out the right window and spots it. A narrow, green strip of grass, a levee running right alongside a canal at a NASA facility. Now get this, they have only 700 feet of altitude left. That is nothing. Captain Dardo grabs the yoke of this 43-ton airliner and basically flies it like a stunt plane. He throws it into a dramatic side slip maneuver, which is this intense cross-control dive usually reserved for tiny little Cessnas. He violently whips this massive 737 into alignment with that tiny strip of grass, battling his own missing eye and lack of depth perception the entire way down.
And against every single law of probability, the 43-ton jet touched down on that rain-soaked grass levee smoothly, without a single engine running. They didn't have thrust reversers to slow them down. They were sliding on wet grass right next to a deep canal. But somehow, they came to a complete, perfectly safe stop.
The relief in that cabin, unbelievable. Lee Burmeister actually called the landing spectacular. She said there wasn't even a bump, a totally perfect landing. The emergency doors pop open, the slides deploy, and Lee goes sliding right down that chute. And those fresh stitches, totally fine. The nurses waiting at the bottom checked her out, and she was perfectly intact. Every single one of the 45 souls on board survived.
But surviving is just part one. Let's move to the anatomy of a disaster. We have to ask, why did these engines fail in the first place? How do two of the most bulletproof jet engines on the planet, on a plane that was barely 2 weeks old, just randomly die? Well, when investigators tried to recreate this in the lab, they had a massive aha moment. Look at this comparison. Standard FAA testing meant running the engines at high speed and throwing water at them. And under those conditions, the engine just spits the water out. Pass. But TACA Flight 110 was completely different. They were descending, so their engines were idling. You mix that idle speed with intense, solid hail, total catastrophic failure. So the crucial takeaway here is that 35% number. The flight data showed the engines were dialed back to exactly 35% thrust for the descent. Because the giant fan blades at the front were spinning so slowly, the heavy hail didn't get bounced off into the bypass doors like it was supposed to. Instead, the hail just slipped right through the gaps in the slow blades, dumped straight into the superheated core, melted into a flood of ice water, and instantly drowned the engines. But hey, the aviation world learns fast. They immediately rolled out engineering fixes to every 737 on Earth. They changed the shape of the engine nose cone. They adjusted the spacing of the fan blades specifically so they deflect hail even when idling. And they added extra drain doors to make sure the core can empty water way faster. Those tweaks mean this incredibly specific nightmare should never happen again. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think past the engineering. Could you maintain your focus and your hope trapped in a 43-ton freefall in complete, eerie darkness? The resilience of passengers like Lee Burmeister sitting in the dark waiting for the end, mixed with the absolute ice-cold focus of Captain Dardo and his crew to pull off a literal miracle, it's absolutely breathtaking. It's a huge win for aviation safety for sure, but mostly, it's an unforgettable testament to the human spirit.